wilderness to shut them in, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them. And I will get the glory over Pharaoh and all his host, and the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. And when the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people. And they said, what is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made ready his chariot, and took his army with him, and took 600 chosen chariots, and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel, while the people of Israel were going out defiantly. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, his horsemen and his army, and overtook them, and camped by the sea at Pi-Hahiroth, in front of Baal-Zephon. When Pharaoh drew near, the people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they feared greatly. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us out of Egypt? Is not this what you have said to Egypt? Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, fear not, stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again, because the Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent. The Lord said to Moses, why do you cry to me? Tell the people of Israel, go forward, lift up your staff, and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground, and I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, so that they shall go in after them. And I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host, his chariots and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen. Then the angel of God, who was going before the host of Israel, moved and went behind them. And a pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them, coming between the host of Egypt and the host of Israel. And there was a cloud in the darkness, and it lit up the night without one coming near the other all night. And then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, the waters being a wall to them on the right hand and on their left. And the Egyptians pursued and went in after them in the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, his horsemen. And in the morning watched the Lord in the pillar of fire and a cloud, looked down on the Egyptian forces, threw the Egyptian forces into panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the sea, then the water may come back upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, and upon their horsemen. So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course when the morning appeared. And as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen of all the host of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained, but the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power the Lord used against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Fire after me. Dear Heavenly Father God, Lord, I'm so thankful, so humbled, God, to be in your presence. God, to have a platform, to have an audience, Lord, and to have a word that I believe is from your throne. God, I pray that this speaks directly into the hearts of each and every one of us who are here today. God, I pray that this word not return void, but it return having changed the people in its hearing. God, I pray that this be your message, that I not muddy it up, God, or mess it up with my own stuff. But God, that you give me fully your word for this people, for this time, for this place, for this appointment. God, hide your servant behind the cross. If there's anything I've thought of sharing that need not be shared, strike it from my mind. And if there's anything that needs to be said, download it in real time. God, I trust you, and I thank you for it in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. So today, Today is a day to recalibrate. Today is a day to refocus. Today is a day to wake up, right? In the last 24 hours, Israel launched an offensive, killing the billionaire leader of the Hamas. That was the leader in control of the territory of Gaza. Now, missiles are being launched from Lebanon into Israel by the hundreds as we speak. Russian cargo planes flying non-stop into Iran all day yesterday and into the night. Iran has engaged Russia's most powerful jamming communication system. War is on the horizon, right? And as Ezekiel 38 and 39 predicted, that war will include nations like Russia and Iran, but we're not there yet. There's more nations to join that fight. It also predicted nations like Saudi Arabia, normally an ally of the Iranian people, as they're both Islamic, standing pat, saying we're not going to enter into this war. But that war is on the horizon. And when that war starts, just know the end is nigh. Jesus said in Matthew 24, nation will rise against nation, people against people. There will be wars and rumors of wars. I don't know if any of you follow current events outside of the Olympics or outside of Israel, but for the last several weeks and months, there has been a powder keg lit in the nation of England, the nation which many of us, our ancestors, came out of to form this great nation. The English people have been replaced because they have soft immigration laws where people are just allowed to come in unvetted and unchecked, and they are allowed to displace the rightful citizens of the nation of England. And the people there are tired of it, and so they're going to the streets. So if you look in places like Newcastle or Liverpool or London, there is fighting and rioting in the streets all day long. You know, England was the place of great revival in the 1800s. Some of the greatest theological minds in the history of Christianity came out of the nation of England. We talk about people like Smith Wigglesworth, Charles Spurgeon. The gospel was alive and well and changing the nation. At that time, something like 80% of British people claimed the name of Christ. In 2022, I read a survey that said less than 6% of the nation of England are now considered born-again Christian. When the nation turns its back on God, God is a God of order. He's not a God of chaos. And when God is no longer in our midst, chaos has no choice but to ensue. When we turn our back on God, why would we expect Him to continue to fight for us? That is the point of today's message. And you think, Brother Nate, it's great that you have these messages on geopolitics and telling us what's going on in the world today, and we could go on and on and on, but how does that help me in my life? Well, guess what? Today isn't just a day to wake up and recalibrate and refocus, because the world is spiraling toward the end. Today is a day to recalibrate, refocus, and wake up, because it's time to begin preparing the way of the Lord. Because each and every one of us have situations in our life where we're taking punches right on the chin, and we don't know how to respond because we've forgotten the God of our fathers. Because we've forgotten the God who brought us out the last time, so we don't know how He's going to impact our situation this time. We've forgotten about the Lord, but today is the day to wake up. We are in a day and a time where the book of Exodus is literally going to play out over the whole face of the globe. That's what we've been studying on Wednesday nights. We've been reading through the book of Revelation, which I said, kiddingly, the first week, if you put Exodus and Joshua together, you get Revelation. Because first, our people have to come out. And then God has to take what belongs to Him. We're on the precipice of history. We are coming to the point where God is going to remove His people. And so last week, the message that God put on my heart was Revelation chapter 18. Come out of her, my people. Come out of her, my people. Come out of her, my people. And I meant that literally, right? Come out of the trappings of the world. Get out of the things that make us exactly like the world. Put away the garbage that drags us down and bogs us down. Keeps us frustrated and stuck in the mud. Keeps us from going forward. Keeps us from being overcomers through Christ Jesus. We have to come out of that stuff. We have to come out of it spiritually. right? We don't have a magic broom or a magic carpet or a magic wand. We can't literally just come out of the world until Jesus Christ grabs us by the hand and pulls us out. But in the meantime, we have to begin to come out of the world. And so, I think what God is saying is, let's see what it looks like to come out. Last week we talked about coming out. This week, let's see what it looks like coming out. How do we come out of the trappings of the world? How do we put all that garbage away and start following Jesus Christ desperately? How do we begin to prepare the way of the Lord? That's the question today. Because many of us have gotten so bogged down with the circumstances of our life that if we were put on trial for being a Christian today, there wouldn't be much evidence to convict us. And so today's the day to refocus. Hey, fortunately, if we can put breath on a mirror, if we can fog it up, that means God's not done with us. That means we didn't fail the test quite yet. That means there's another day to give it another try, to follow closer to Jesus Christ, to get desperate for what He has for us in our life. And so, what I want to say today is pretty simple. This is a long chapter, and you think, well, Brother Nate, how is this applicable to us? We're not wandering in the wilderness. We're not slaves in Egypt. We're not facing the Red Sea. There's no nation chasing us down. And I would ask you this question. Do you really believe that? Do you really believe that? I think one day I'll probably write a book, From the Cotton Field to the Corporate Office. We've just changed the slavery to make it that much greater. How many of you have debt on your home? Debt on a car? How many of you are paying high interest rates here or there? How many of you could literally come out of Caesar if you wanted to? Or if you name the name of Christ like they did during the COVID era in Canada, what would happen if they just seized all of the assets in your bank account? Who would feel up a stream without a paddle? Right? We read this like it's just a story. But this is the story of human history. This is good versus evil, city of man versus city of God. This is Babylon versus Jerusalem. This is Satan versus Jesus Christ, and we are the people caught in the crossfire. And we have too often bought the lie that says we need to buy things that we can't afford with money we don't have to impress people we don't know. And we keep going deeper and deeper and deeper into the Babylonian system. We spend all of our time on Facebook wondering what other people think about us and how they have this great life. Or we've moved on. We've transitioned from Facebook to wasting all of our time on TikTok. Chinese malware, right? Something that's going to infect all of your software, take all of your passwords, and watch everything you do. Worse than the NSA. Yes, the NSA of the United States of America, watching everything you do. The people who are supposed to serve us don't serve us. They are working against us. They are keeping us enslaved and in bondage. There are algorithms on all of your social media sites that you get a serotonin shot every time someone likes something that you post, and it keeps you on there for hours and hours and hours. It's no longer called Facebook, it's called the metaverse. And we all joke with Hart because he doesn't want to get on anything with the meta. He's a lot more right than the rest of us, right? The metaverse has been created to be a digital simulation that distracts us from this reality. There are people that get on things in their metaverse and they'll buy fake wedding rings for fake people that they don't know with real money out of their bank account. Because the fantasy is much easier to accept than the reality, because the reality has us beat down and depressed and downtrodden. And so we continue to serve the false gods around us, right? Isn't that what was going on in Egypt here? The Jewish people, the Hebrews, had gone into Egypt and they had been there 400 years. How long have we been in these United States? When did the Pilgrims land? Christopher Columbus landed in 1492. They began colonizing in 1620. 404 years we've been colonizing this rock. We've been developing this nation 400 years, and we give them such a bad time. How in 400 years have they stopped hearing the voice of the Lord? How have they become subservient to the Egyptians? How did they become subservient to the Egyptian gods? How had they been slaves there? How had the culture not changed? Question. There was no Pharaoh when we got to America. So how come we're worshiping all the gods of Egypt? We're no different than the Hebrews. We believe the lie. We think it's better that they give us spices after a 20-hour day where we're making bricks with no straw than it is to be free and eat manna and quail from heaven. Why? Because that's what the world's told us. Folks, wake up. Today's the day to wake up. We've got to get out of this dream. We've got to stop trying to keep up with the Joneses. Guess what? I don't know anyone named Jones. I don't really care what they have. I don't want it. I don't need it. It's not a part of my reality. And so today, I'm going to make a deal with you. I'm going to start coming out of it. Can we all agree to do that? Come out of her, my people. Jesus is looking for a spotless bride who's following the Lamb of God, who overcome this world by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. In order for that to be possible, we have to have the blood of the Lamb over our life, and we have to have a testimony to give.
Yeah.
If we can't do that, if there is no difference, then what's the difference? You know, the old saying is, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck and it flies like a duck, it's probably not a chicken, right? It's a duck. Unfortunately, the church has bought into this. We'll just begin acting more and more like the world, and maybe by acting like the world, we'll trick the world into coming and finding Jesus. If you're not following Jesus and you're bringing people with you, you know who you're following? You're following the enemy.
Yes.
Jesus says, if you're not for me, you're against me. If you're not gathering, you're scattering. We have to find ourselves gathering. We have to stop acting like the world and pretending that we're holier than they. Judging them for the sins that they have against Christ when we, the church, should know better. And listen, when I say we, I might as well say I. I said it in Sunday school this morning. I say we just so I feel better about myself, but this is really a message to me and for me. Come out of her. Come out of the world. Come out of all the garbage that keeps you from being spotless. That keeps you from being cleansed. That keeps you from being pure, white as snow, made by the blood of the Lamb. Come out of her. We have to begin to come out of her. So how do we do that? I believe the process, the product, and the purpose have not changed since Exodus 14. What are you talking about, Brother Nate? The first thing we decide to do is to come out of her, right? That's the decision that was made to start Exodus chapter 14. At the beginning of this chapter, after the plagues have fallen on Egypt, after the Egyptians have handed over all of their wealth, after the firstborn Egyptian children have died, finally the Israelites feel bold enough, like, you know what, we're just going to see our way out. They've finally decided now is the time to come out of her, right? So 14 starts really, really interesting. I don't know if any of you caught it. I tried to read fast because it was a lot of verses, and I was afraid I was going to cough several times, so my antihistamine has kicked in. I think we're good for a few minutes. But at the beginning of this, let me just reread it for us, because this is one of those moments where this isn't Vacation Bible School anymore. We have to read this chapter like adults, right? When I was a child, I think like a child and I spake like a child. But when I became an adult, I put away childish things. We have to put away the nursery rhyme version of Moses in the Exodus out of Egypt. These were real people who had really been enslaved with real bloodshed and plagues and death and trauma. These were real people coming out of their lives and leaving and traveling across the country with a real army chasing them. And it's interesting, the Lord said to Moses, tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Pi-Hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, in front of Baal-Zephon. This always hits me kind of like it hits me when I read about Elijah. Like, so God, you want me to douse this sacrifice with water and then we're going to light it on fire? God, I'm sure you have a plan, but that plan sounds dumb to me, right? We're leaving Egypt. Why are you now telling me to turn back and stop and face some ridiculous mountain that doesn't make any sense? Has anyone ever read that and thought, boy, Lord, I don't know how you escape places, but that's not how I come out of places. I usually just, find the closest freeway, put it in, fifth gear and drive 90 to as far away as I can get it, right? Usually I don't turn and stop and wait for, the enemy to come find me. And it's interesting, he tells them to face Baal-Zephon. Even more interesting is that this aligned perfectly with the exact region we were talking about in Judges chapter 12 this morning. The chapter started this end. If you're missing our adult Sunday school class, you're just missing, because I don't know about any of you, but I love it. Reading Judges is just, one of my love languages. Because of all the murder and deceit and war and who doesn't get all riled up about all that stuff. Baal-Zephon. If that name doesn't strike you as odd, it should. Baal-Zephon. Baal-Zephon was the name of the god of the Phoenician people. It was the name of the god of Rome. This was the mountain of the god of pagan worship of the ancient world. And God, who's calling them out of Egypt, tells them to stop and encamp there and turn and face that mountain. What do we talk about Wednesday night? Love isn't love if there's no choice. If God forced us to make the right decision every time, then we're not choosing. We're just robots, right? We have no power or free will, and there is nothing that separates us from machinery or the animal kingdom, and there's nothing redeemable about humanity. And yet, God put a choice in the garden. We always have a choice. He wants us to choose Him. He wants us to choose Him. Everybody say it with me. He wants us to choose Him. He wants us to choose Him over our Facebook account. He wants us to choose Him over our marriage sometimes. He wants us to choose Him over our dinner plans, over our children. He wants us to choose Him over our favorite sports team, over our favorite crime show, over our favorite TikTok video, over our favorite car, or our big house, or over our dreams. He wants us to choose Him. So when you make the decision today, when you leave here, and you have all these things running through your mind, how do I get out of the system? How do I begin to come out for my people? As it says in Revelation chapter 18. Once you make that decision, I just want you to know the trial starts then. Right? Yeah. Because God is going to let you come face to face with the very thing that's been plaguing you. The thing that's been taking your time and your attention. He's going to bring you face to face that the gods that you were worshiping before. 400 years God didn't speak to them in Egypt. Why? Because instead of changing the culture and introducing them to the God of their fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they had begun to worship the idols of Egypt, the idols of Canaan, the idols of the Philistines, the idols of the Amorites, and the Moabites, and the Amalekites, and the Jebusites. They were worshiping the idols of the pagan world. They didn't even know their God. That's why when Moses showed up and said, I'm going to lead you out of there, he has to give them a name, because no one had said that name in hundreds of years. Yeah. If someone showed up in the middle of the United States of America and said, God is saying, I want the church to come out for my people, there's a lot of people that would think they were a nut. Right? And so they're coming out, and now they're face to face with the God that had prospered the nation of Egypt. Right? The Egyptians were in charge, not the Hebrews. Surely their God was the more powerful God. The Egyptians ate of the fat of the land. The Egyptians had gold and jewelry and wealth and status. They came face to face with everything that they had held dear for 400 years. When you make the decision to come out, God's going to bring you face to face. You have a choice to make. The thing that you're struggling with, the thing that you're thinking right now, that's the thing I have to overcome. When you decide, I'm putting it away and I'm never going back, that thing's going to be presented to you. You're going to have to choose. You don't get to just run away scot-free. God's going to make you confront it, and you're going to have to overcome it. He's not just going to wave a magic wand over your head and say, all right, you decided to come out and now you're good. It's going to be hard, right? Sometimes it's probably not going to make sense. You're going to have this thought go through your mind. God, that's the one thing I wanted to get away from, and now everything I see and everywhere I look, there it is, and that's all I can think about. God, I'm trying to choose you. That process hasn't changed. That process hasn't changed. Why? Why were they there? Because God wanted the glory for this. If they had just left, if they all got in boats and crossed the Red Sea, if they went and camped in the wilderness and the Egyptians never followed them or anything, who gets the glory for that? That's it. They get it themselves. That's right. Hey, this can be call and response. If they just got away scot-free, how would anyone know that it was God who delivered them? Right? If you can just white-knuckle it and overcome all of the things that have you in bondage, then what do you need God for? Right? And yet it's His grace that's sufficient. And I'm not going to go into all the things that plague us. But just know if you're coming over an alcohol addiction and you put your resume on LinkedIn, I bet you the first 5 jobs that post to you are going to be bartending jobs. Right? That's how it's going to go. You're going to have to get alone with the Lord and say, God, you've got to help me overcome this, because in and of myself, I can't do it. I can't do it. You're going to have to choose. The snake is going to find its way in the garden, and it's going to say tempting and cunning words, and you're going to have to choose God anyway. That's the way that it goes. That process hasn't changed. He is a God who wants to be loved, and He wants to be your choice. And He's there because He left them there now, staring in the face of the pagan idolatry that they had been bound under for 400 years. And He says, I want the Egyptians to see you and remember that they were chasing you. Boy, that sounds strange, doesn't it? Why would you want them to chase us, God? We were almost gone. We were almost free. He wasn't done dealing with the Egyptians either, right? The book of Revelation seems so harsh as we read it, right? Anyone read through it and think like, boy, this is never ending. My goodness, who could survive this? And yet, we're to chapter 16 this week. Chapter 16. Let me just say it now so I don't mistype it on Tuesday. We're going to be in Revelation chapter 16 this week. And what we see is God continues to show them and hammer away at them. I'm God, look at me. I'm God, look at me. I'm God, look at me. The Hebrews were starting to get the idea that He was God and He was in control. The Egyptians still hadn't got it yet, right? They still needed to see more, and so they turned to go and they encamp here at Migdal facing Baal Zephon. And Pharaoh says, wait a second, we just let our labor force leave? This was our gravy train. If the Hebrews are gone, we're going to have to do all this stuff ourselves. What am I thinking? We got to go chase them, right? And so they come and chase them. They were bait. No, they were a part of God's plan. Your life is bigger than yourself. You are an audience for someone, whether you know it or not. Every place you go, even on the metaverse, someone is watching you. Someone is judging you. Someone is taking their cues from you. Someone wants to see that you have a genuine, authentic relationship with God, or that you're a hypocrite just like everyone else they've ever met in every other religion. You are going to be the proof that there is God or the proof that there isn't. Whether you know it or not, you are playing your part in a play. You are a part of the Great Commission, whether you choose to be or not. And that's why Jesus says you're either gathering with me or you're scattering. You don't have to actively scatter to scatter. Your life can scatter for you. You can turn people off to Christianity just by being yourself and being a part of this world. Or by doing what God's called you to do. Many might be saved. Isn't that what Joseph says to his brothers? What the enemy meant for my harm, God turned for the good of us all, so that many would be saved. Your situation, some of you are facing some pretty crappy situations. I don't know all of them, but some of you are facing some pretty crappy situations, right? Your ability to trust the Lord in the middle of those situations is going to be the determining factor in someone else's life, whether to trust your God or not. Whether you like it or not, you are a part of the Great Commission. And so Pharaoh begins to chase them, and he takes all of his chariots and all of his horses and his entire army. This is the greatest army in the world. And they're chasing these untrained slave Hebrew people out into the wilderness. And what do the Hebrews do? Something that none of us would ever dare do. Right? They start losing their faith. Any of you ever been in the middle of a trial? Anyone have a storm come in their life? Only me. When the storm comes, the first place that we turn is immediately, God, why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me? God, what's wrong with you? That's the inference, right? Isn't that what Adam basically says in the garden? Lord, it's this woman you gave me. It's your fault, God. Had you not given her to me, or if you'd given me a better woman, we wouldn't be in this situation. God, you messed up. I'm just doing what you did. So the Egyptians get out in the wilderness and they see the enemy coming. And they're trying to get out as desperately as they can. And they start blaming God and they start blaming Moses. What do they say? Were there not graves in Egypt that we could have just died there? Is that why you brought us out in the wilderness to die? Didn't we tell you we didn't want to leave? Didn't we tell you we were content to serve the Egyptians? We didn't want to be killed by them. Think about this. Think about this. I want to parallel this with the life of David. They have just watched Moses, a meek little man, 80 years old, who was timid and didn't want to approach the Pharaoh, have his staff consume the snakes of Egypt. He saw the Nile River turn to blood, the people covered in boils and flies and frogs, hail, darkness. The firstborn of Egypt died at the hand of the Lord. They had been given the wealth of Egypt and sent on their way. What else could they have been shown? What else were they waiting for God to tell them? He was telling them, I'm God. I'm God. I'm in control. He had systematically destroyed each and every god of Egypt, and he was going to finally destroy the mountain of God, Baal Zephon. He just needed them to do their part, to have faith. To have faith in the middle of the storm. The process hasn't changed. The storm is going to come. In our lives, storms are going to come. God didn't promise us the absence of storms. He promised us that storms would come. But we have to have faith to walk through the storm. Right? And so the storm comes, and unlike anyone in this room, all of us handle storms perfectly. Never do we question God or wonder why He's brought us here just to let us down this time. We've never seen Him come through for us over and over. We've never seen Him directing and ordering the steps of our life. So when the storms come, we all handle it just fine. We're just like David. God, we've killed lions together. We've killed bears together. Goliath's going to be no problem. That's how we all act, right? But the people at the church down the street that I know, no, this is how we all act. This is how we all act. When the next storm comes, we become incredulous. God, why me? Why are you doing this to me? Why are you punishing me? Where are you at? Like a kid, right? Isn't that how our kids act? Dad, you said. Mom, you said. Why? This is unfair. We have to have faith in the middle of the storm. God's calling us to choose Him and to trust Him. Many of us say that we follow Jesus Christ, and yet whenever He asks us to do something, we either sit down like an old mule and say, I'm not doing that. I'll do anything. Remember the old Wickliffe song, I would do anything for love, but I won't do that? Who knows what He won't do? Whatever it is, He shouldn't have said He'd do anything in the first place. Anything that comes after the but. My brother used to say, I love you to death, but. I said, just get to the point. You don't love me at all, and you're going to tell me all the reasons why after you say but, right? We have to have faith in the midst of the storm. You think about Moses saying, God, I don't want to approach Pharaoh. I'm a man. I don't even have the right words. And I'm a fugitive. And I'm just a sheep herder. And what would I even say to now? Moses is basically like, if you all would shut up and trust God, then we're going to come through this okay. And these Egyptians that you think are so great, God is going to show you just how lowly they are. If we would all take a second in the middle of our circumstance to look at the person in the mirror and say, stop complaining about it and stop whining about it and start trusting God to get you through as He's gotten you through before, then we would feel a lot better about the storms that come into our life, and God would have a lot more ability to save us in the midst of that. But the problem is we talk ourselves into death. We speak death over our situation. We complain to everybody we know, and we talk about, well, I don't know why God's not blessing me. When was the last time you consulted the Lord about it? All you want to do is get on Facebook and complain about it, and get on your hotline and complain about it, and get with your spouse and complain about it. God isn't a God who works through your complaints. He is a God who works through your faith. The Hebrew people had better thank God that Moses was the person in charge, because he had been through so many storms that he didn't even have to ask. He just said, if you would be silent, then the Lord would deliver a great victory this day. This is the process, and it's unchanged since the beginning of time. If we would all look ourselves in the mirror and say, shut up about it and let God work on our behalf, then our situations would begin to get better. We spend so much time trying to convince everybody that we're the broken one, that we've been wrong, that we're the victim, that we're the worst, that nothing's ever happened like this to anybody else except us, that we never put our trust in God to show up and get in the middle of our mess and begin to fix it. Because sometimes that mess is there to expose a cancer that's so deep that if we never got in the mess, it could never be cured. So here's the call to all of us today. I'm talking to myself. I'm going to find a mirror when I get home. I'm going to look at it and I'm going to say, shut up about it. God's working on your behalf. Isn't that what Moses says? God's going to work this out for you, and all you have to do is be silent. He was telling an entire nation, just shut up. Stop complaining, stop griping, stop taking the victim role. Just be quiet and trust God. The process hasn't changed. So what's the product? The product is this. You notice Moses doesn't even consort God. He doesn't even ask him. I mean, he's the one speaking faith, and then God kind of scolds him. Moses, why are you crying out to me? Hold your staff up and let's see this thing start to go. When we have faith, when we trust God, when we do what He's called us to do, in the middle of all this mess, suddenly God can make a way where there seems to be no way. He deals in things we cannot see. He can make a way for me. Remember, Elijah and Jehoshaphat are sitting down in the valley, and the servant is like, we're outnumbered, what are we going to do? And Elisha says, look again, for they that before us are greater than they that be against us. And when the servant looked, he saw chariots and angels circling the mountain, right?